Hello, my name is Kwame Bailey with DLR Group, and welcome to our Design for Equity with Immigrant Students International High School at Langley Park presentation. We'll get into introductions momentarily, but I just wanted to take some time to underscore the importance of this discussion in today's environment. There are conversations going on around this country and in the world relative to the immigrant population, relative to equity, relative to diversity, and relative to inclusivity that are critically important conversations. My father actually immigrated to this country from Jamaica in 1956. And as I think about all the obstacles and barriers he had to overcome to get to where he is today, I do think about the students at International High School and the success story that we're going to discuss today. With me here today are some of my wonderfully talented colleagues and partners. We are, however, just a small part of the team that worked on this project and are an important part of its success. With me today, we have Dr. Carlos Beato, Principal Director at International High School at Langley Park, Sarah Woodhead, K-12 Education Leader on the project, Edgar Moreno, K-12 Architect with DLR Group, and I am Kwame Bailey, K-12 Client Leader and Community Liaison with DLR Group. I have almost 20 years in the business. The majority of my time has been spent engaging with communities we serve in the built educational environment. My role on the project was to help facilitate the community and stakeholder engagement process. I will turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about their background, starting with Dr. Beato.
Good morning, everyone. So again, my name is Dr. Carlos Beato, and I'm currently the founding principal at the International High School at Langley Park. I also share the immigrant experience, and my passion in education has always been working with students from marginalized groups where there are plenty of opportunities to help students grow.
Hi, my name is Edgar Moreno. I am the project manager for the design team at DLR Group. I am an architect, and I also have, like Kwame and Dr. Beato, have a personal connection to this school and its programs. I am the son of immigrants from El Salvador, so it was really exciting to be able to be part of this process. And really, I think the most one of the best parts of this project is really engaging with the school community, Dr. Beato, his staff, and the students especially. A really rewarding experience, and really happy with being able to be part of this team.
Hi, I'm Sarah Woodhead. I'm the principal in charge of this project for DLR Group. I'm an architect with many years of experience, and my heart is really in this project for all the reasons that my fellow panelists stated. I've spent parts of my career working with refugee populations, and we know that a beautiful school can make a difference in the lives and education of children. And so this project has really been a privilege to work on, and we're so excited to share it with you today. Turning it over to Dr. Beato, I think, to take us into the next section. No, Kwame, you're going to do the agenda first.
That's correct. 1 second, the presentation is not advancing. Okay, so today we're going to talk to you about the IHSLP context. We're going to talk about barriers to success for immigrant students, creating educational success, trauma-informed design, master planning the site, community engagement, which I will cover, and design outcomes. With that said, I'll turn it over to Dr. Beato to talk about the immigrant student experience.
Thank you. And before we get into the design building aspect of this presentation, it's important to understand the context of the immigrant student experience, specifically to Prince George's County and the state of Maryland. So International High School at Langley Park was designed to support English language learners in Prince George's County. There are two in the county, one serving the northernmost part, which is the Langley Park Riverdale area, and then the other one serving the rest of the county. When we opened, 46% of English language learners were graduating on time. PGCPS has has received the second highest number of English language learners in the state of Maryland. Many of the students come to IHSLP from the Langley Park community, as I mentioned before. It's a place that's overpopulated, where over 70% of the community doesn't have health insurance. It's a place of opportunity where we can engage the community. Next slide, please. All right. So some of the barriers to the success for immigrant students in schools and when they immigrate to a place like the United States is that sometimes students have had to work in their home countries. They're not able to spend as much time in school during the day. In some countries, for example, students only go to school for a few short hours and are housed in spaces where all grade levels attend school at the same time. So there's no direct instruction related to standards at specific grade levels. Students may be also fleeing gangs, which is one of the top reasons why our students make the choice to travel along with fleeing civil war or reunifying with family or friends or friends of family. Work-life balance is also a point of contention with our families once our kids are in the system. Sometimes it's just out of necessity. Families choose to send kids to work instead of school, or sending them to school inconsistently. So many of the students in our community also lack proper health insurance because their immigration status doesn't allow them to have the resources that they need. And as I mentioned before, over 70% of the Langley Park community does not have health insurance. So collectively and independently, this creates a dropout pressure for our students. And sometimes it becomes a little difficult to manage these barriers that are taking place outside of school because one, parents may not be able to advocate for their kids because of their education level. They might be working multiple jobs and they may not be able to come to school as often. And that's important. Over 90% of our kids receive free or reduced lunch. And I know that I've presented these as barriers, but they truly are opportunities for us to do things differently for kids in general. Next slide. In traditional schools, you may find that there's misalignment with the school building culture and the students' needs, cultural and ethnic bias and ongoing judgment from peers and teachers, which may lead students to feel like outsiders. There's a lack of representation in school from teacher reps and peers that lead students to feeling isolated as well. Students may not feel safe and do not take academic risks because there might be a lack of targeted strategies being used to support them in their learning. Other misalignments may be that there are underqualified teachers working with English language learners, which then leads to a lack of network improvement communities where teachers are able to talk about some of these barriers and challenges and getting advice on how to move forward. What will follow is a video from IHSLP through which you will get a small piece of what makes IHSLP the special place that it is.
We currently have around 335 students. About 14 different languages are spoken at our school, and about 24 different countries are represented.
I have friends from Syria, I have friends from Iraq, I have friends from Africa. So it makes me feel more comfortable to be an international kid surrounded by other international students.
I founded this school in August of 2015. I'm the only Latino high school principal in Prince George's County. I was born in the Dominican Republic, but I was raised in the Bronx. I thought I would never have the opportunity of going to college. I've been in their shoes. I know what it's like to feel persecuted.
He's lived it, and that's so incredibly powerful for our students to see a bilingual, once undocumented school leader who speaks their language and knows what they're going through and knows their struggles.
I was born in Eritrea, Eastern Africa, and I lived there until I was 6 years old, and then I left to live in Sudan, to be a refugee there.
I was living in El Salvador before I came to live in the United States. Before I started high school, I didn't speak English at all.
When I was 11, the UN, they brought me here to America. I never had any education before that. You know, I didn't know the language, I don't know the basic things like math, science, and anything. So it was very hard and I needed extra help, but I never got until I came to school.
To date, we are one of the high schools with the most students exiting out of the ESOL program. And that's because of the services that we put in place for students.
We have an entire instructional staff that's willing to meet students where they are. For the student who has the interrupted education, for the student who is bringing PTSD into the classroom, we have very deliberately built a socio-emotional curriculum around empathy and around this concept of creating familial communities.
Where are we in this journey? Well, we are about to graduate our first class. We have kids that have gone above and beyond. They've put in the hard work, and we're ready to see them walk and graduate.
With Mr. Beato, we can actually relate to him because he's an immigrant who also came over looking for a better future, and he's done that through school.
You know, I'm from the Boogie Down Bronx, and I went to Middlebury College in the middle of nowhere in Vermont.
When I graduate, I'm looking to go to a small liberal art college, student business.
My goals after graduation are to attend college, a four-year college. I have a big interest in like journalism and sports media.
Obviously, there's going to be some hurdles and some complications with undocumented students, but that first acceptance letter is a message to every other high school age newcomer that they too can go from being a non-English speaking newcomer to a high school graduate on the cusp of college.
When I get the college acceptance letter, my mom will probably cry. I'll probably slide on the floor like a soccer player celebrate. And then I'll start thinking, oh God, what am I gonna do then? Am I gonna leave after 1 year? Am I gonna finish 4 years of college? Can I handle 4 years of college?
The runs are beautiful, but just get that ball off your foot and then cut right into the middle of the field.
I plan on being involved in my students' lives until they tell me not to be anymore. And so, you know, we'll make sure those supports are available.
I want our students to be remembered as trailblazers because they've just proven so many people wrong about what their expectations are of the immigrant community.
If you saw where some of these kids were 3 or 4 years ago, and if you think back to in their lives when they were sitting in a detention center somewhere in South Texas trying to find a family member, my students have experienced far more chaos and turmoil in their 17 or 18 years than I have in my 32. And whether it's our STEM team winning 4th place in an international STEM competition or our soccer team winning a county championship, our kids are changing what it means to be an immigrant high school student in America, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
And we'll transition now over to some of the educational successes. But before I do that, this video was made back in 2019 when our first cohort graduated. Yoni, Yaya, and Eric all attend private liberal arts schools and are going into their junior year. And 2 of the 3 of them will be studying abroad as well next year. Next slide, please. And as a community school, International High School at Langley Park was designed to be a space where English language learners could be successful by having a school that attends to their educational, social, and emotional success. And so, you know, the school was started thanks to the help of a grant from Carnegie Foundation. to build on the international school model that was started in New York a number of years ago. It was always intended to be a small school model with no more than 400 students, open to everyone, but tuned to the needs of at-risk students from the English language learner community. And in order to get the process started, there was a wide search, a nationwide search for school leadership to make sure that we had the right people in place, because the research currently shows that, there aren't a lot of people that understand the immigrant or ELL experience. And so it's important to have the right people in place. And as I mentioned earlier, most of our, the school is supposed to be located in the crossroads of Langley Park, right in the middle of it, because as a community school model, we hope to be able to serve the community in a variety of ways. Next slide. And just to understand the instructional model in our school, we're guided by the 5 Hello principles from the Internationals Network for Public Schools. And this became an important aspect of the design process as we were thinking about, so how do we want this school to look and how do we want it to feel? And so through heterogeneity and collaboration, for us, it means that we're not isolating students, but rather integrating them into the learning experience, no matter where they are in their language journey. With experiential learning, it refers to the idea of students experiencing the learning in a context that makes sense to them. The idea that teachers at our school pay close attention to language and integrate it into the student learning experience is a constant reminder that we're being culturally responsive and preparing lessons that integrate language needs for our students. In localized autonomy and responsibility, decisions are made collaboratively in a group where all constituencies of our learning community are represented. And lastly, with our one learning model for all, it's a concept that we understand that whatever is good enough for the students is good enough for the rest of us. Next slide. Partnerships are essential in order for us to provide a well-rounded education for our kids. We promised them that they would get a well-rounded education, and we can't do that alone. So we need to bring in people that have expertise in different areas to be able to support this journey. These partnerships help support the school with some of those healthcare services, SEL supports, through social work interns, extracurricular activities, college courses for advancement of credits and preparation for a post-secondary experience. And given our experience, we know and understand as a school that having a building that is responsive to these needs is important and allows our students to feel loved, cared for, and provides an ecosystem for a successful schooling experience. One of our most recent successes include being named as one of the top 40% of high schools in the United States of America, as determined by the US News and World Report. And while this may not be an all-encompassing data point, it does tell us we're going in the right direction to building the school we need to serve our English language learners.
So one of the aspects of the project that we really focused on, given the demographics of the students who attend international high school, is an understanding of trauma-informed design and how we can build a better school with these students in mind. But a lot of the lessons that we've learned along the way would really apply to many, many schools in design. So we're happy to share some of those principles with you. Next slide, please. Exposure to childhood trauma. We heard from Dr. Beato that many of the students have been through a lot in their lives by the time they get to the high school. The CDC has done a study of adverse childhood experiences, which is really their term of art for some of the gang violence and other things that have impacted students and others in the US. Trauma affects physical, mental, emotional, and social health, and is linked with later adult depression, violence, chronic disease, and early death. The CDC found that 61% of adults have experienced some childhood trauma in their lives, and women and racial and ethnic minority groups are at greater risk for having multiple traumatic events in their childhood. So this is an area that really applies. I think anytime we're working with a student body, we need to think that this is an impact that many individuals have had to face. Further research from Harvard shows that exposure to toxic stress in childhood can damage developing brains, making it extremely difficult to focus and to learn in school. Next slide, please. So this is another way to show, I think, the same information. If at the foundation there are adverse childhood experiences, those adverse events ripple through an individual's life. They can disrupt neurodevelopment. They can impair social, emotional, and cognitive development. And as adults or as young adults, we see higher incidence of adoption of high-risk behaviors, leading to disease, disability, social problems, violence, and potentially early death. So this is something that is very important and really, I think, at the heart, next slide, please, of International High School's program. Before we talk about the facility, I think we heard from Dr. Beato that the model for the school really focuses on developing a sense of safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, as well as cultural, historic, and gender awareness. And all of these, I think, help to create the right atmosphere in the school, the right relationships for the students. But the design of the building also plays a significant role, and that's really where we come in. We apply principles of trauma-informed design to create spaces that promote healing, well-being, and growth. So a trauma-informed school building creates a sense of attachment and stability in students by providing safe spaces to refocus, to express emotion, and to develop secure connections with peers and mentors. And as we've heard, those relationships carry well into their adulthood. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about a few of the principles, and then when Edgar takes us through the building, he'll go into more detail about how we've interpreted these principles in the design of International High School. One of the key principles is biophilia. Contact with nature is essential for physical and mental health. Plants and natural imagery have been shown to reduce stress and promote self-esteem, and views to the outdoors and natural light help students feel secure. We've done that in this design, as Edgar will show. I think it really is one of the things that transforms the learning environment. Next slide, please. A concept that was very important in the design of the school, and I think is a new area of focus, are the concepts of refuge and prospect. And again, thinking about those individuals who have really gone through some tough challenges in their lives, helping people feel safe and secure in their school environment is really important. So we wanted to create spaces where students can have an overview of the area where they are. There are not lots of hidden nooks and crannies, so that there's a sense of really being able to survey their environment. And at the same time, having a sense of refuge where you're not out in the middle of the open unless you choose to be. So the open spaces are of a certain size, they're crafted a certain way, the edges of the spaces are modeled in with certain characteristics so that you get both refuge and prospect. And I think that's something that we've been able to do very successfully in this design. Next slide. So adding to those two principles and actually kind of overlapping with them is a de-institutionalized atmosphere. Obviously, biophilia is a great way to begin to have a building and a school site that feels less institutional. And in this case, institutional feeling environments could re-traumatize students who've had negative experiences, whether it's with immigration system or with other institutions in their home countries. So creating a different kind of atmosphere that's student-centered and that's not so institutional, I think is really critical to creating the international high school that we think these students deserve and will benefit most from. Next slide, please. Color theory is another area where trauma-informed design comes into play. We're creating a palette of spaces that are calming, that are warm, they promote concentration. Our interior design experts have helped us to craft an interior palette that really meets those goals. We have cross-laminated timber as a structural system for most of the school. And that is wonderful in that it gives us the opportunity to have many wood finished surfaces on the interior. It's important to consider that reactions to color can also be deeply rooted in cultural experiences. So collaboration with the school community on this aspect of the design is also very important. Next slide. Another aspect of trauma-informed design is really recognizing the importance of connection, and that's student-to-student connection, student to adult, small group learning. So one of the most important interventions that can reduce the consequences of childhood trauma is the involvement of trustworthy adults in a traumatized child's life. And as you've heard from Dr. Beato, that's absolutely essential to the international high school approach. So a trauma-informed school would promote communication between students, teachers, and counseling staff by providing warm, comfortable spaces for these relationships to develop throughout the building. And Edgar will share some of those with you. So in summary, next slide, please. A school designed using the principles of trauma-informed design can promote lifelong health and well-being for students. Students who feel a sense of safety and belonging in their school are better able to relax and concentrate. When the trauma so many students face is addressed in a caring way, both through design and through the support of stable adults, those students can reach their full academic potential. Next slide. We've got some links here for resources if you want to follow up further on the topic of adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed design. Next. Edgar will take us into the design of the school.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So now we're getting into building the international high school, and these next few slides will touch on some of the considerations brought about by the site location and surrounding context. You can go to the next slide, please. So as Dr. Beato mentioned, the site for the school is in the Langley Park neighborhood in Prince George's County, Maryland, just north of Hyattsville, Maryland, and within the Capital Beltway. It's a multicultural community. It's been dubbed the International Corridor because of this, because of these developments with immigrant families coming in over the decades. The majority of the ethnic groups are Spanish speaking, but the community consists of other families from different regions, including African countries and Syria, and you've met a few in the video that we saw earlier. So it's literally in the heart of Langley Park, the high school, and most students that attend international high school are from this neighborhood. So having it within their community, with the idea of it being a community school is even doubly important. Currently, they have to commute to a different facility, which is 7 miles away. The soccer team practice facility is also in an off-site location. So having all these amenities within the schools was very important early on and a key objective. And as Dr. Biazzo mentioned, one thing that we've discovered is just the need for services. You know, how can the high school serve the population, the community by accommodating some of these services? You talked about 70% of the community do not having access to healthcare. So having these considerations in our programming and in the planning of the school was something that we felt was a key opportunity to pursue. So the next slide. So in order to understand what services and amenities we'd like to accommodate within the school, we had to evaluate the surrounding context. So we looked at data of the neighborhood and sort of the surrounding services and conditions, which include the type of residential density that we had, but as well as what are the community assets that are within reach of the school, and where are the shortfalls, where are the holes that we could backfill in with this new community school. If you go to the next slide. So we did find is that there's a pretty robust transportation system. There's a large bus depot off of Universal Boulevard off to the west side of the site. The new Metro Purple line is scheduled to be routing through this zone. And then there's several transportation options in terms of bus lines. And then the image on the right, you can see where we've identified some of the existing community services, which are highlighted with the orange circles. So in looking at all the services and amenities that are provided, we're able to get a clear picture of what we can do to support additional programs to families in this community. Next slide. So now we're looking in at the site itself. One nice development was that the site itself is just south of the northwest branch of the Anacostia River. So when we talk about biophilia, when we talk about views to nature, this was sort of a good starting point, having that direct access to nature, and I'll show some images in the next couple of slides. On the right, another key challenge here is the fact that we are sharing a site with the Langley Park, the McCormick Elementary School, which is the building that you see on the top of the site boundary on the right slide and the right image, and then the community center. So not only are we dealing with two separate facilities, we're dealing with two different entities, a public school, but also working with the Parks Department, and really important to engage with those groups and have them be part of this design process in a collaborative effort to really figure out where the synergies are and produce something that will be mutually beneficial, not only for the community center, but for the elementary as well. So you can see the boundary of where the International High School would go. It's an existing open space right now. And if you go to the next slide, get a closer look at some of the existing conditions. It is a challenging site. So you can see on the top right image, there's some topography to work around. There's a big incline from the sidewalk up to the upper plateau where the school would go. So how you would access the school, how you would manage bus drop-offs, vehicular drop-offs, how the community would access the site from the pedestrian way were challenges that we had to resolve in the very early conceptual planning stages. And then on the lower images, you can see the entrance to the trail that leads to the northwest branch. So it's literally right off of the site, easy access to nature and that trailhead. Next slide. And here's some images of the northwest branch. So you get a sense of really how close and immediate the natural resources are to the site and how we can take advantage of that. So the key considerations in terms of site planning is we've been mentioning on this in this presentation is the school being a hub for the community. being a good neighbor to the community center and the elementary school. Really learning how to work with the landscape that's there, the topography, the proximity to nature, how to accommodate a full-size soccer field, which is a key element in the site program. So all of these things sort of put together, and you go to the next slide. We were able to start laying out possibilities for where the school would go. So this is one of several concepts that we developed and shared with the community, got feedback on. And we settled on this siting right off of Merrimack Drive, which is south of the site. In order to allow for maximum space to accommodate the soccer field, but also other site needs and amenities such as the parking, the outdoor classroom spaces, and also dealing with local stormwater management requirements, creating nice bioretention areas that are integrated with the landscape. Next slide. So here's a clear, more defined layout of the site. You can see the soccer field, it figures prominently, and really it was a very strong desire to make sure that that soccer field was regulation size so we can host community, so we can host a competition events and matches. It's very well understood that in addition to serving the school and the site, it's open to the community. Right now, there's no full-size soccer field within proximity of this neighborhood. So not only is it was a strong desire to need to have it for the school, it was echoed with the needs of the community as a whole. You can see the footprint of the building to the south on the very bottom of the site image, and then just sort of between the elementary school and the community center, the space that we allocated for parking. Then I'll just quickly go through these slides. These are precedent images in talking about how we can create a secure and supporting environment for the students. We really looked at every opportunity that there was to create outdoor gathering spaces, outdoor learning opportunities, and really to be in a space within nature. So these are some precedent images that we use to develop our entry plaza and approach while working with the existing topography. Next slide. More gathering spaces, again, trying to maximize the available space that we have to accommodate gatherings. So you can see some precedent images here. Keynote M, which you see on the image on the far left, is within a bioretention area where we propose putting in a elevated deck, which can be an outdoor classroom space, but also just a space for students to be in and hang out and enjoy nature. Next slide. And then the parking court, we didn't want to simply just pave over a parking area to accommodate vehicles. We wanted to make it a welcoming space, multi-use space. So we're proposing the use of pavers with striping and incorporating some color and landscape to make it a nicer space than a conventional typical parking area. And it also serves as the community approach to the school. So we felt it was important to make sure that it was a pleasant experience as you approach the community entrance. And here's an aerial view to give you a sense of the massing and relationship with the surrounding context, but also with the elementary and the community center. Obviously, the soccer field features prominently. You get a sense of the parking as well and how we're treating the hardscape. Here is the bus drop-off. This is where the students would be picked up and dropped off in the morning. However, the community would be coming in from the opposite side. And here's the approach from the parking area into the community center, community entrance.
All right, thank you, Edgar. As we get into the section to talk about community engagement is all about collaboration and partnership. It's about helping to build consensus and a shared vision. It's about activating everyone's design voice and creating an environment where everyone feels vested in the success and the outcome of the project. This process is always important, but it becomes even more important when interacting with the immigrant population and traditionally underserved communities. It becomes all about removing barriers and obstacles and barriers to communication. We make sure that there are translators when necessary. We have dual language speakers on staff. Edgar and Sarah helped with Spanish and Arabic translations. We also have a goal to meet the community wherever they are, or have existing school events like school night, back to school night, career day, or at the elementary schools in the community. We really tried to pull out all the stops to make sure that we activated as many of the voices as we could. Through this process, we engaged with all stakeholders, students and teachers, parents, families, the PTA and community organizations like Casa de Maryland and MNCCP. This is all about partnership and activating small voices. The school community will also be a community resource, and we want to help promote positivity and connectivity. As you can see here, our engagement process is very robust. It's a kind of a phased process with visioning with Prince George's County Public Schools leadership, the planning committee. Here we're just trying to discover and ideate and work with all of the stakeholders, including the students and teachers, about what they envision their school being in the future. We use exercises like the cultural continuum to talk about where they view the school now and where they see their school in the future. We really try to activate just a creative opportunity for people to put themselves in their future school and see it for all that it can do. In the second phase of the engagement process, we're going through programming and planning, and this involves the faculty. What's really interesting here, as I continue on to the next slide, is as you can see us working with students, going through the visioning and the rapid prototyping, which Edgar will talk about shortly. We did have, for instance, 2 teachers that were a little skeptical about the design. They probably had been involved in other projects or processes where, these were just kind of dotting I's and checking T's, and there was not really any real outcome of the engagement. But through this process, they really got excited. They had some fun with our, engagement activities. And by the end of the process, they were very engaged, and we had built some consensus there, and they were really on board and really excited about the project going forward in the future. So as we look at our engagement activities, we have kind of a toolkit to choose from, and what we do is customize this to the group that we're meeting with. We want to make it fun, we want to make it interesting, and we want to pull out those voices from people that normally wouldn't feel comfortable speaking and be involved in the process, so that again, we're building consensus and everyone is vested in the success of the project. I'll let Edgar talk a little bit about the rapid prototyping process.
Right, and if you can go back to the previous slide, I just wanted to touch on a couple of the images here. So Kwame talked about engaging at different levels. So the large image, you can see we're with the international high school students, and the type of activities that we provide for them, really catering to what we envision as their input and feedback. On the upper right, you can see that we are meeting with the staff and faculty. So it was a really a deliberate effort to meet with every level of the high school, and this even goes beyond that. There's another slide later on we'll share where we met with the neighborhood community members through the CASA organization. If you go to the next slide, you can see an example of some of these engagement activities. This is called the rapid prototype exercise. This is one that we did with the students. So basically what we do, we print out a large sort of a generic floor plan of a building, of a school, and then the students themselves populate it with what they would like to see. And then you can see There were images that were available that they were able to literally just stick on there. And then in addition to that, add some additional thoughts with the Post-its. So this really creates a documentation of what the students would really like to see in their high school, what is important to them, and what they see as key objectives to making them successful students. We go to the next slide. So here's another example of the same exercise. So we have these 4 categories: core values, meaning and purpose, activities, and practices. And we divvied up the students by team. So this particular board was created by the Team Phoenix. And then you can see on the left some of the outcomes of this exercise. So core values for this team was fun, joyful learning, creativity. In the next category, the practices, sports. Of course, we've been talking about the significance of the soccer field and some of the successes the school has had, and how athletics plays a big cultural part of their community. Core activities such as outdoor learning, experimentation and performance. These are things that sort of show themselves in sort of the site planning effort, making sure that there's access to the outdoors, but also spaces where they could gather and collaborate. And then meaning and purpose, making sure that we're encouraging and promoting creativity. Next slide. Here's an image from our community session that was organized by the CASA organization. So again, another layer of community input to really gauge how they envision the school serving the community as a whole. And then during these sessions, as I mentioned earlier, we shared the various conceptual options for where the building would be located, again, with their input, which led to the selection of the site layout on the top left, which we call the Hilltown concept. So in terms of the community engagement approach, again, it was really intended to be an engagement level at all scales, starting with the students, meeting with families, meeting with school staff, and other stakeholders and entities, making sure that we accommodated the kind of multicultural background of the community, making sure that the presentation materials, that the presentations themselves were available to folks from different backgrounds and languages. And now we're getting to the actual inside of the building itself in the school layout. Just one thing to touch on as we revisit the site plan is I mentioned how the community and the students access. So the main entry is really coming in from the north side, from the main parking area. That is intended to be the community entrance. On the south side, on that hill that was shown on some of the earlier slides, is where the students would be dropped off and picked up. So once you get into the building, on the next slide, you can see our ground floor layout. The gymnasium is on the lower portion of the site, along with the fitness zone. And then opposite that, you see that it's sort of bisected by a linear pathway, which we call the promenade, is really where all the community services would be located. In here, we have the family center, the career center, the dining commons, and then over there on the far right, we have the art room and the music room, which can also serve the community, but also be multifunctional. On the upper levels, that's where the academic spaces are. So each level has 8 learning studios. And then we talked about some of the principles early on, making sure that the students are in a secure environment, promoting collaboration, access to staff. So on the blue areas is where we have allocated space for admin. So on every level, there's going to be a staff person assigned, the principal, assistant principal, and then sort of all centered and focused around this open gathering area, which is actually the library/media center program distributed across all floors. So really providing a space and an opportunity for the students to interact with each other, to collaborate, but also to meet with staff. Then on the next slide, just to kind of maintain that efficiency, it's basically a stacked version of the floor below. But as you can see, the same distribution of spaces is repeated here, where you have the admin space in blue, and then the gathering spaces in sort of surrounded by the learning studios, which all have operable partitions that can open to that space. And you get a better sense of that in the interior walkthrough.
And just to add, the school operates with an upper school and a lower school, dividing the grades, and that's not absolutely formal, but the two levels of academic classrooms support that to a great extent as well.
And we can go through these slides that pretty much represent our intent in introducing natural materials such as wood. You know, Sarah mentioned the use of the cross-laminated timber, but also natural daylight, making sure that we're providing adequate opportunities for outdoor views and bringing in natural light. In the next slide. Flexibility of spaces, places where students can gather, spaces that can be opened up to other spaces. Also, strong consideration in our floor plan layout for the academic levels. Here's a slide showing cross-laminated timber. So this is a structural system, but also serves as a nice interior finish element, again, promoting the use of natural materials, promoting biophilia, really having an environment that is calming and conducive to having a safe atmosphere for the students. And Sarah touched on color theory, how important it is to acknowledge the fact that color does play a role in how one feels within a space. So our interior group selecting a palette of calming, warm colors, but also drawing from the school colors of blue and yellow on the gymnasium side. And then again, you see the use of the wood and natural materials that are worked into the overall materials palette. Okay, picking up on our aerial walkthrough, now we're entering the building through what is the student entrance. And as you enter, here is the gymnasium over to the left side. And then you can see you're looking down the promenade. You can see that we have gathering spaces within that zone. The dining commons, the career center, family center, all located on this floor. So not only serving its day-to-day purpose as a kind of school zone, but after hours and on weekends can be a destination for the community as well. This is the gymnasium, sized to accommodate not only the school, but the adjacent community center, flexible and used to host different kinds of activities and events. Right now, the community center does not have a gym, so this is an extra nice amenity to have to sort of support that program next door with the Langley Park Community Center. Here's some interior views of spaces that will be accessible by the community. So a family center, able to hold meetings. Here's the music room, as I mentioned before. Can also host other activities that serves as a multifunctional space. Now we're here in the upper level academic zone. So this is the central area where library media program is distributed, but also serves as a space for collaboration. You can see sort of along the walls, we have operable glass partitions. So you have that visual sightline, visual connectivity, promoting some of the principles we talked about early on. Here's a typical classroom, and you can see sort of how the timber material is integrated with the interior materials. Also maximizing the amount of daylight and views that we get for each learning studio. Here is a science lab. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kwame to wrap up the slideshow.
Thank you, Edgar. Well, that concludes our presentation. Hopefully you have enjoyed us taking you through some of the special features of the project and our sensitivity to the immigrant community and our approach to the design, and just, you know, all of the exciting elements that were developed through collaboration with the students, the faculty, Dr. Beato, the community. We really enjoyed the process of designing this project, and we look forward to the opportunity to continue to talk about it, share it, and you know, continue to help develop the success story for the students of International High School. Thank you for joining us today, and be well.